I think a lot of people have plans in their heads, and
Mm.
if I sort of deal with sort of business owners, they have a plan in their head, and I think that's probably good. But in some contexts, it's good to get it out.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
G'day, Julian. How are you?
Yes, good to see you, Damien. I'm very well, thank you. Very, very good to see you. It's been a while since we've spoken. I don't know when it was, but it seems a long time. It's good to have a catch up with you.
Well, it has. I think it's been 2 months since we've caught up. I know you've been busy and I've been busy, and time just moves on. But it is nice to be able to have these catch ups around the world. We're going to have to. I still want to come to your house and jump in that plunge pool. My.
Well, it's a bit warm now. Actually, you're probably appreciating that. It's about 16 degrees, so it's lost. I've lost the love for it at the moment, to be honest. So I'm now reverting to cold showers.
Okay.
Even the sea's warm. I mean, the sea's about 15, 16 degrees, so
Yeah.
that's relatively warm to people. But I'm in a funny old way. Not that I'm wishing time to go by, but we'll be looking forward to the winter when the temperature starts to drop again outside.
Yeah, I get that experience in the shower when I'm in the shower and someone turns a tap on in the kitchen. It's like, oh, hang on a minute, turn the car. Get that
Yes.
experience. But on that, we were talking about, planning, and because it's one of the things wanted to plan to come to England, so to get there. But we were talking about exploring. You want exploring the plan, adapting to that. It's an interesting point because when I think about it a lot, and people that I work with, a lot of times I find that they don't have a plan to start with. Um, is that from your experience? Is that what how have you found when we're talking about planning? Because it seems like an obvious thing, but how many people actually do plan it well from your experience?
Yeah, I think it's there's the old adage I don't really like is that, you got to sort of you don't plan, you'll plan to fail, all that sort of stuff.
Mm,
No, I think planning is important.
mm,
I think a lot of people have plans in their heads, and
mm,
if I sort of deal with sort of business owners or even senior executives, they have a plan in their head, and I think that's probably good. But in some contexts, it's good to get it out more
mm,
explicitly and more written down and more. And it doesn't have to be onerous because I've worked in organisations where it's taken months to do plans for the following year when we're doing budget planning and in some sense there's an element of due diligence, elements of
mm.
working things through. But I've increasingly got more into more simplistically, trying to get things on one page, trying to get things in a simple, because otherwise, if it's too onerous, you won't even look at it, you won't engage with it. Make it really quite simple in terms of your approach.
Mm,
And I think the key for me with all these plans and is making sure it's aligned to whether it's in a vision or a purpose, however you want to term it. And I think
mm,
it's to me that's the crux of it all, because I think often where people not go wrong as such, but perhaps go a little bit off beam, they put plans in place of things they ought to do or think they should be doing, whether it's in comparison to other people, other
mm,
markets, and actually what's the plan for you or your business or your organization, and making sure that is aligned to a sort of purpose and sort of values as well of who you are or what your organization is. I'm a board member of my local chamber of commerce,
mm,
and I facilitated because that's what I do as part of my role, is to bring that sort of, I guess, strategic direction to the chamber.
mm.
We spent half a day sort of re-establishing what was our mission or vision as a chamber, and through that it was really good. And it, what it did as a group of, there's 8 of us, it created this lots of talk, lots of conversation, but also this alignment came at the end, and it was brilliant and fantastic. And then out of that came sort of 4 key sort of pillars of approach. And then now we're in the process of writing a sort of strategic plan. But it's given so much energy, so much focus, so much bounce about what we're doing, and purpose. And that's the key thing. It's the purpose, and our plan's got to have a sense of purpose about it. And that's where you're going. And and I think that's, for me, is where it always starts with your purpose or mission or vision, however you want to term it. And that's what the plan is for, really.
It's interesting you talk about that reinvigoration that happened through going through that process. Is that something useful that you have found to actually go through the process, even just as a revision, just to reinvigorate the connection to the plan?
Oh, totally. I think we, I always recommend, whether it's a personal plan or a corporate, sort of organizational one, is certainly to revisit that purpose, or all the time. But in terms of a context of planning, okay, where are we going? Does this plan still align to where we're going? Does it make sense? Things have changed since the last time we looked at this, and I think that's where the adaptability piece comes in. But what it does do, it does reinvigorate. So, okay, we're here to, our vision as a chamber is to help our members thrive. It's quite simple. So it's a really simple sort of vision, really. But with that means, well, okay, what are we doing to help our members thrive in their business, in their organizations? Because we have charities as well, and then that's our focus. And so whatever activity we're doing, events or online stuff or information we put out there, does this help us thrive, help our members thrive? And there's that overarching sort of, I guess, purpose. And I think that's where the energy, that's where the focus comes with that. So almost revisit it in the context of plan, but almost being really mindfully aware of it in all the things you do. And I know myself, my overarching thing is helping people and leaders unlock their potential, and then through that developing resilience. And so in all I do, whether it's launching a podcast, getting involved in speaking on podcasts, various things, all the things I do, I always think, does this align to what I'm trying to do? And so even though I might have a plan of what I'm doing, when things come my way, it keeps me centered on what I'm trying to achieve, because obviously things change and you've got to take opportunity as well. But often if you're not aware or have a sense of purpose or vision, then we get caught up with the whole shiny new object syndrome, where we go, that looks interesting, and we end up just almost spinning around, just going for the interesting stuff. But when the interesting stuff comes and you go, oh, actually, this is really interesting, but does it align to where I'm trying to get in the overall picture of my plan? They go, yeah, it does. Okay, let's do it. Let's go for it. And that's what I tend to work with.
Because that can be easy to do. You get the new shiny thing come and grab your attention, and all of a sudden you're doing 50 million things instead of a couple of focused things, and it becomes, as you say, you're spinning around and not really doing much. Do you break it down? Because from my perspective, what I break them down, I with the planning into 3 areas, separate for business and personal, but they're related in a way. For an individual, for me, I look, economic is where I look at, and it's like, how much money do I want to earn? What assets do I want to own? That kind of thing. And I plan around how I'm going to achieve that. Then I've got personal for me, which is, things that I want to learn, how I'm going to give, the type of relationships that I want. So I set that into my plan. And then I have, the toys and things. You got to have the fun stuff. So for me, generally, that it revolves around Lego. And I went to the shop this afternoon, got the new Pac-Man Lego that's come out. So that'll be something for me to do.
Brilliant.
So, and that's.
Do you when you buy it, do you say you're buying for your son? Do you, or you just literally openly say, "Oh, this is for me"?
very much for me. You remember, you're talking to someone that bought an 1,800 square meter factory and built a radio controlled car track inside it. So,
right, okay.
No, I did. It's funny the phases you go through in that, because I did that. I used to race, and I played with Lego as a kid, and I used to race radio controlled cars as a kid. And then I went into adulthood and kind of stopped doing that. And I was thinking about it for a long time, that I wanted to, I was looking at I kept looking at the radio controlled cars with this kind of nostalgic, longing eyes, and seeing every
Mm.
now and then I'd see them in different places and things like that. But I go, oh, no, I'm an adult, can't do that, and that was my thinking. And then we're in St. Moritz. I'm not sure why, but they got a really cool toy shop there. And well, not why, but I was in the toy shop and I looked at, and they had a Lego set. It was a really cool hot rod. So and I went, I got a bit of free time, so I bought this Lego set, and from there I started collecting and buying Lego. And I must say too, I'm not a fan. My ex-wife was loved going on boat cruises, her and her whole family. So I got dragged along to that, and to me it was like mind-numbingly boring. And also too, I think I might be a little bit sensitive because the boat is always travels and at night, so I never slept very well because I just could feel it vibrating. Um, but I remember we got to local trip that we did here around here, we went to New Zealand, got to Auckland, I got off the boat, I went straight to the toy shop and bought the biggest Lego excavator set that they had, or the biggest set, which was this big excavator. And they were, and then so I'm back on the boat, and I was doing it in the library. But in the library on this boat was where the main elevator shaft was. So I had the stairs and the
Mm.
elevator, but it was open, so it was open plan, and so people could see me doing this, building this set. And it was surprising the amount of men that came past and went, "What a fucking good idea." And I went, "You're bored too?" And they went, "Yep."
Did they start helping you?
No, they didn't. But it was kind of interesting how many did that. But then from there, that's where that radio control car thing. Because I was sitting there, I had all this Lego, and I was going, well, if I'm buying Lego, why can't I buy radio controlled cars? So I started, and I got a collection of 250 vintage radio controlled cars still in the box, the original box from the
Wow.
yeah. So it was kind of, and sort of built this factory. But that's the toys and fun goal. It's nice when you got a budget, a decent budget.
Yes, indeed.
And coming to that planning as well with the companies, with organizations, I break it down into, again, economic, what's the revenue, what profit, what assets do you need to run the business,
Mm.
to the equity that you need, the mental blank, assets to run the business anyway.
Mm.
Then I have operational, and that relates to how it operates, like lead generation, but also that deals a lot with cost and where we, the
Mm.
efficiency of the operation. And then the third element is culture. What sort of, environment do you want to, how do people want to, how do you want the business to feel? How do you want people to
Mm.
feel when in the business, and focus on that?
Mm.
So in that planning, and then that gives an overarching, I have a big list of things, and then do the Warren Buffett thing or Steve Jobs thing, where you just make this big list and then you cull it and just go, okay, the top bit is the only bit I'm focusing on. And that just gives that
Mm.
focus. I know, and when you achieve that, then move on to the next one. But and then, I mean, as you say, there's an adaptability to that, because then you've got to go through and it works. Sometimes is it relevant, what you're doing, what you
Mm.
start out doing, which in an organization is always fun. As you know, change is, there's two things people complain about. Change is one of them, and the other one is the way things are. So either way,
Yes. Exactly.
but I found, that component of, well, the process of getting clear on where you're going makes a big difference. What I found, what I did was, as part of the exceptional effort program that I have and I implement, there's a continuous improvement module. And what we
Mm.
do there is we have a weekly meeting with each department, and it's no more than half an hour, very short. And it starts on time and finishes on time. I kind of mandate that to try and encourage, the accountability to time.
Mm.
And what the aim was to, you identify the problems, and you get everyone to bring their top two problems. The first meeting, I always bring your top two problems. We put them out on a list on the board, and then I ask them to prioritize it. What's the most pressing problem they have to deal with? And so as a group, they do that. And And then once we've done that, we've got this list of 20 or 30 items. No more than 15 people in the meeting. But and I say, okay, can we solve all this all at once? And never yet have I had someone say yes. It's always no, that's not possible. And then so what if we focus on the top two? And they go, that's a good idea. It's like, really? Oh, I was surprised. Wouldn't have known that. And then we work through the top two. Everyone has a task to do, and everyone creates their own task as well. So I get them to go, what task are you going to do to solve this problem? Or to work towards solving this problem for the next meeting. And so they go off and do that. And what I found, two things I found really important is, and I implemented it later in the meetings and then in my life, was what I call a no excuse policy. And that means because you've set the task, if you come next time to the meeting and haven't done it, you can't give an excuse. All you can say is, I didn't do it. There's no judgment, no blame or anything like that. No one can go, why didn't you do it? It's just like, did you do your task? No, I didn't do it. That's all you can say. And so again, no blame, no what could you, no analyzing it or anything like that. It's just, I didn't do it. It was amazing the accountability that went up when we had the no excuse policy come in, and you couldn't give an excuse. You just could say, I didn't do it. It was amazing how much just actually.
That's brilliant. That's so working with people's ego, isn't it? Because then you're saying, actually, because accountability is so powerful, actually, by saying that they got to do it, or at least have attempted to do it, at least started it. But to say they haven't done it that's not that you help, you motivate by shame, but there's a sense of that ego piece doesn't want to put themselves out that way, does it?
Yeah, well, and it's what I said, very much about there's no blame at all. Just all is like, where are you did you get your task done? And it was like, so it wasn't going through why didn't you get it done or anything like that. It was, we just go around the room. Did you get task done? Did you get task done? And all you could say was, yes or no, I didn't. And you didn't want to be the person that said, no, I didn't. And I in one of the early ones I did, I actually had to lead by example with that, because I had it sorted and then it fell over.
Oh no.
Just before the meeting. And so I just went, no, I didn't. And then I moved on. And it was, I didn't give a reason. And it was really, but what I found most powerful about that process and dealing with change and progressively making that change happen was in the organizations that adopted it properly. Some tried and didn't do well, and other people, they weren't interested in it. But the ones that adopted it, the complaints in the organization almost disappeared. It was interesting because, and I was looking at that going, what happened was, I believe, well, this is what I think happened, was because they saw all the problems that they were seeing in isolation, going, this is my problem, this is the problem I'm dealing with all the time, and they're complaining about it. Then they saw it in the big picture of everything there, but they also were heard. It's like, okay, I get my problems heard, and now that I've seen it in the big picture of what everything else is, I understand it's in there to be looked at. But I get that it's part of a bigger picture now, and it stopped the majority of complaints. But also what happened is that things that were lower down on the list, people would just go and fix. It was really interesting how that came together. From implementing that change with the plan, I found that really, really powerful, because you were going through and those problems were being identified. They were being prioritized. The team was prioritizing. The team were choosing their own tasks.
You're empowering, isn't it? And I think that's, you're not being just told what to do. And I think this is where you're engaging a team of, what are the problems? How can we solve them? What responsibility are you taking? And I think, when I've worked with organizations in terms of building plans with teams, it's the team piece. The power is so powerful. I have a process probably similar to you, where we get the vision piece, which is really important, and I work on this thing called an acronym called VOST. So it's vision, objectives, strategy, tactics. So you start with your vision, which is the big old, where you're going, massive. 10 years time, you want to be whatever you want to be. And that's the inspiring bits. And then you have And then we go, what are the next? And we sometimes split it up by sales, marketing, operational, people, various segments of the organization. And then I'll say to them, what are the sort of anywhere from 3 to 5 big objectives do you need to achieve in the next 12, 18 months to get you closer to that vision? Doesn't mean not always achieve it, because the vision's quite a stretch and it's out there. What's going to get you closer? And make those objectives quite smart. And this surprisingly can take a lot of time to try and get to those 3 to 5, because these are the big meaty stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not talking little small thing, the massive stuff. And we can spend half a day trying to whittle down, because they come up with a whole load, as you say, 20, 30, and it's just far too many. It's just too much. So we narrow it down to say 3 to 5, and then we take each objective and we go, okay, so that's the what. And that's, in some sense, that's the easy bit. Well, not the easy bit sometimes to get there, but what you want is you can just say it. The bit that's quite challenging in any plan is, or what a plan is the how bit, and that's the strategies. So then we spend time of going, okay, you want to, I don't know, generate 10 leads per month, whatever it is, So how are you going to do that? And then we have some strategies, and out of those strategies, you might be 3 or 4 strategies.
Yeah.
And then each strategy, and this is where it becomes really quite detailed.
Yeah.
You then put in tactics. It's almost the little daily action plans. Because for me, in essence, we are not in control of the objective. If you set an objective uses in the future, really you have no control over that. Because it's out in the future. Now, I'm not saying you have an element of realism of what that objective is, but you don't really have any control over it. And I think that's the mindset to have. And then the only control you have is what you do in the day-to-day stuff, the process bits. That's the only control you have. And so the tactics piece are really important. So almost you go from objective, strategy, tactics, and then the day-to-day stuff. And that is the stuff you're doing to get to do the strategy, and the strategy to do the objective. And so, and obviously adapting along the way and changing, because things always do change. And then what I do then is okay, so you get a tactic of whatever that may be, and they go down to the detail they want to go, how far, and then I'll go and I use this thing called it's called RACI. It's like a way of it stands for who's responsible for this action.
Okay.
And who's accountable for this action. So, and they're usually the same person. So somebody's going to actually do it, but somebody's accountable. Those two. And then who do you need to consult when you're doing this action in terms of have a conversation with, and who do you need to just let know that you're doing it, or how the progress is. And it's a good way of then populating that with individuals. So you have somebody who will be accountable for a tactic. And that's the important thing. We talk about accountability. And if we do this as a team, I'll go, you've got this tactic, and I'll go, who's going to be accountable for this? Who's going to put their name down on this one and be responsible to be action? And we put it down. So then once we got a plan in place, and that level of detail, sounds a lot of detail, it is. Every month they can go as a team and go through each of the objectives, each of the strategies, each of the tactics, and go, oh, this tactic we had to do, and Damien, you're responsible and accountable for this. What's the progress on this? And then we color code it with red, amber, green. And so it's in progress, not quite there yet, therefore it's an amber, or I've just not done it, or for whatever reason it's not happening, or actually no, I've done it, we're okay, green, move on. And so you can then start color coding, and then you can start see your progress, and obviously you adapt and change them as things need to be done. But I think it goes back to that accountability piece, which I think is important, and going back to the piece that you're only in charge or in control of those daily actions, the process bits, not the overall outcome. And so and it works really well. I mean, it's a lot of work, and people love the sexy bit of the vision, the purpose bit, and the values, and that's really, and that is inspiring. And then the hard work starts with okay, how are we going to do this? And this is where we've got to get to the nitty gritty. But what I love about it is that you can literally plot a tactic. This tactic here, this contribution I'm doing, is linked to this strategy,
Mm-hmm.
which is linked to this objective, which is linked to the vision, and it all lines up nicely. And so if I don't do this particular task or plan action, then potentially we're at risk of not getting close to our vision, because and it makes people feel that they have a contribution, because they're all linked to it. And so if all those actions don't get done, then those things are not going to happen on them.
How does that work? I love that the way you've linked that together from vision right through to the objectives, strategy and tactics, and that you've separated strategy and tactics, because a lot of people, can be a lot of focus on tactic without really focusing on strategy, which is really important, because strategy is much more powerful than tactics serve them. How do you, from that perspective, you've set that accountability, but then when you go through, when we're talking about being adaptable, how do you assess those actions are being, are moving you in the right direction, and then make those changes if need be?
I think this is where, whether you do it monthly, quarterly, depending on the nature of your business and how it works, is having those genuine open conversations, realizing actually the strategy, and it goes back to, the objective we set, is that still valid? Is it still, I use the acronym SMARTER, so it's smart, but with the ER on the end. So you must evaluate, reevaluate, and or redo, sort of basically. So is that objective still valid? And you can get an indication of that based on either you're just not getting any headway from the tactic or strategy point of view. But I think it's just having those open conversations and saying, actually, a competitor's come in, this has changed the landscape, we need to change this and adapt this. And that could be at the objective end, or it could be at the tactic end. And I think it's not just changing everything just because it's hard, but having a genuine conversation. And it might be that actually you're not the right person to be doing it, actually, or actually you probably need a bit more resource for yourself, whether that's financially or people, to accomplish that task. And at the time when we put the plan in place, we didn't realize it was going to take longer, or we didn't realize it needed that extra £10,000 to actually get that over the line, or whatever it may be. So I think it's having those open conversations, and that's where the adaptability piece comes in. I think it's not saying, but it's not going down the line of, oh, it's hard, therefore we're going to adapt and it's difficult, but actually really challenging each other, making sure there's a robustness around it, and and creating that sort of support as well, because I think that's where it's important. As if you're a leader, it's not just about, oh well, they're responsible and accountable, therefore they must go and do it, but actually you might need to help them, support them in that, in terms of what they're trying to do as well.
What about from the perspective of we going down that chain from vision, objectives, strategy to tactics? When we take into account the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, generally most of the results you're going to get are from that 20%. How do you assess that when we're talking about adaptability and looking at something going, well, yeah, it's kind of working, but we need to change that, or we could improve its efficiency or make it better, or maybe we'd need to drop it and do something else to get there. Do you go through that process at all?
Yeah, I would do this similar thing. I mean, it would almost, it's almost like, is this tactic valid now? It might not be. It might not be the means to the end that we thought it was a month ago, 3 months ago. So you stop doing it, or actually, no, it is. It's just slower progress. Well, okay, let's continue then. Let's continue. That's fine. Or actually, what we might need to do is change the sort of focus of what we're trying to do with this tactic. And I think that's important. And and it sounds like, if you have a plan, and I did last year a client, and they ended up with loads of tactics, and but the business was so excited to enter the new year, because they had this almost like to-do list that you all work together. But they weren't just to-do lists in isolation. They were all linked to this bigger picture. So if they all did those to-do lists, they would get closer to their vision and hit those objectives. So it was thought through from the top down. But as you do it bottom up, sometimes you can lose sight of it. And that's why putting it on a very simple spreadsheet, it's all linked. And so you can see that almost line through all the way from the vision right way to the tactic. And so it keeps you inspired as well. And it's motivational because then, you know that thing I'm doing might be a little bit boring or dull and not very aspiring in itself, but the inspiration is that it gets us closer because it adds and contributes all the way up the chain. And it's just those small little steps, and everything is small little steps, isn't it, to create bigger steps. Nothing's in one big sort of move forward. It's many little steps that we do as an organization that shift us closer.
Is it, I mean, from that perspective as well, when you start doing that, how much of it, the ability to adapt to that change, comes down to the communication and being able to communicate, and then the team to be able to communicate with each other?
Well, yeah, and I think but it's not just communicating, it's communicating openly and honestly as well. Because I think it's because, we can all communicate and make things up and say where we are, we're not really there, for fear of, feeling shame or feeling we're not doing the right thing, or we're going to be chastised, or feel we're going to be sacked in that context. And so I think it's creating that environment where people do feel comfortable and safe and psychologically safe to be able to share, look, I'm really struggling with this tactic I've said I would do, and giving reasons in the context of help, of saying, look, I'm struggling with this, and perhaps I don't know, is it right for me, and almost using that opportunity of, it's almost the action learning sets approach, isn't it? People bring a problem and then get other people to ask questions, and then people give you advice. So it's using that context of that. And I think that's, to me, where the power. I did it with a team recently where it was a team and the CEO was there, and he just went off on one angle. It was almost like a digression of what we were talking about, and about time management. And he just sort of the struggle with it and all that. So I said, okay, I said, we'll do this process. And suddenly I got him in the middle, and the team, and they all asked him questions, and then they gave advice, and he came up with like 3 or 4 key points he was going to do differently. And it was quite powerful because it created a little bit of vulnerability for him as well, but also the team went through a process that actually they could do that on any problem that anybody brings, but also creating a culture that it's okay to bring, I'm struggling with this, and I'm all out of ideas how to do this. I've tried this, tried that. I am owning this tactic. I just need your help and perspectives and different thoughts on this. What do you think? And almost getting different, whether it's departments or different aspects of the business to input. And that helps, that sort of culture of openness, transparency, but also then the adaptability comes with it. Oh, I never thought about that. I'll do it that way now. And then you go off and then you accomplish it from that different perspective. So I think it's communicating, but it's making sure that communication is genuinely open and honest.
Is that a personality thing from your experience, though? So it depends on the person rather than an organization?
Personality plays a role. I think some people are more open and more that way, but I think you can still create a culture of openness, as long as you don't think openness is just how you perceive it as long as it's. Well, that's the thing, isn't it?
I think it's the point I'm getting to, because I've seen it many times where they go, "We've got an open culture." It's like the okay, well, let's work as a team and do it my way.
Exactly. And it's like, well, actually, let's be open the way I'm open.
Yeah.
Telling somebody you're oversharing. Well, I don't think I am oversharing, but it's making sure that open transparency is creating insights into whether it's issues, problems, also opportunities as well. It's creating you're moving forward. So there's some sort of almost metrics that you are moving forward, or you're solving things, or you're getting things done. There's a sense of, some people are, and it's creating opportunities where some people are more open on a one-to-one basis than a sort of on a team basis, which is okay. And this is where, as a coach, when I'm facilitating is, I look for the ones who are quieter and I draw them out. I don't just put them on the spot, and I draw them out, and I say, oh, Dame, what are your thoughts on that? And try to get their insight, because I
want to talk.
because I often say to people that is listen to the quiet ones. They tend to be, which is almost ironic in itself. Listen to the person who's not speaking, because they're generally coming up with, they've got insight. They're just reflecting on it. They're taking a bit more time, and there's always the ones who will talk first and will come up with the art, and that's you can take all that. They're all different, but listen to the one who's not speaking, and then think, okay, so Damien, what do you think? And I remember coaching the team of ladies who used to roam around Great Britain, and there was one quiet one, and I spotted at the early days that she was that, but she had lots of insight, and I used to almost allow time enough for then her to have the process time. She wouldn't speak first, and I knew, and I'd come to her and I'd say, what are your thoughts? And then she'd come out with these absolute rich gems of information and insight, and they were like, wow. And I made the points, from to everybody that who she was and how she works, and as a team, there's about 3 or 4 of you are all a bit rah 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 rah. Actually, allow her to say things, because actually not maybe better, but she'll process things differently and think differently, and also give some amazing insight. But you got to allow that space for her.
And because that's what I find fascinating about when we're talking about organizations, is there's so much rich knowledge in there to bring out. Like you were just talking about with the rowing team, but it's a matter of bringing it out, because I find in a lot of bigger organizations, generally they'll get some large consulting firm in to do, and they'll spend 8 months going through and interviewing people. They've got no concept of what's going on, because they're not in the organization. They're taking something, got a questionnaire that they're following, getting some interviews, which are, people generally, if it's an external firm, there's caginess about, even though it's supposed to be anonymous, people generally don't trust that. And then, they go and process it, and 12 months later, you've got, from the start, you've got this report that says this is what you need to do. And I wonder about, with that adaptability and change as well, well, I know how effective it is. It's not effective at all, because, going through this 12-month process of taking that information to a third hand and it becomes, and then, okay, here's a report and implement that. More often than not, that goes on a bookshelf somewhere and never gets looked at again.
Very expensive book, very expensive report at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. And similar, I found similar sort of thing happens when organizations have a lesson learned as well, which is a good intention. Is at the end of a project, they'll get together and go, okay, let's do a lessons learned. A lot of times they'll talk about doing a lessons learned and never have it happen anyway, which is probably a better result, because usually when they do a lessons learned, you lose a day. You get a nice lunch and stuff like that. But they do a workshop, get lessons learned, and they take all this stuff, and it doesn't go anywhere. It just, again, goes into a shelf somewhere, collated somewhere, and goes into a file. And I just wonder about that from that adaptability perspective. It sounds like, because I know I do it, and it sounds like you're doing a similar sort of thing, where you're having these regular discussions and dealing with that as you move forward. Is that how you approach it as well?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm, as much as I do coaching, consulting, and work with organizations, I don't work on the principle of spending 3-4 months and then go, ta-da, this is what you need to do. To me, it's using the knowledge. I go into organizations that I don't know their sector at all. I know a little bit, but I don't know as much as they will. But I can facilitate through a process, through what I do, to enable them. And the thing is, it's about enabling and empowering them, because they're going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Once I've done my bit, I walk away. They carry on. And I think that's the difference, is making sure whatever process you put in place is that there's this empowering and enabling sort of culture and accountability with it. And I think however often you review things, but making sure you're willing to adapt. And I think that's, I just said at the start, where I said, you're not in control of your your outcomes. You've got no control of your outcomes or objectives.
Mm.
And therefore, that means things are always going to change.
Mm-hmm.
Things you're always going to do, you had a plan to do X, Y, Z. Well, you're going to end up doing A, B, C, I'm afraid. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
being fatalistic. It's being in that mindset that, okay, we set a plan, our intent, and that's good.
Mm.
You've got to set an intent.
Mm.
But things crop up that we weren't aware of. Things happen, whether that's from, take in the last few years, pandemic, for us, Brexit, Ukraine war, there's some big stuff there, but then
I'm
there's
not
also
laughing at
small stuff.
Ukraine war, but Brexit I am.
Yeah, I know. And but there's just there's smaller things in our, in each industry, whether it's competitor launches, something new, and there's always going to be something you're not aware of when you plan. And I think you have to have that ability to be able to adapt. And I do. It's interesting. I did this with a team recently where we're talking about building resilience, and I think it's where people do struggle when they get so fixated on a plan or an objective, and it's not happening, and they get frustrated. They don't feel good enough because it's not happening. I'm not making it happen, and well, actually, I always say to them, "You're not in control of that," and they always go, "Well, I am." So, well, okay, tell me how you're in control of that, and then you can see them going, "Yeah, okay, I'm not really." So no. It doesn't mean you don't do it. It doesn't mean it's fatalistic.
It's like the
But we
force.
talk.
You control it, but it controls you.
Yeah, exactly. I said the only time you're in control of anything is in the now, in the moments. You and I in this conversation, we are in control of ourselves and how we respond right now.
Yeah.
But I'm not in half an hour's time. I've no idea what's going to happen in half an hour's time. And so, what I do a lot with organisations is I did it so with a team recently. We talk about sort of what if scenarios. So we almost sort of scenario plan, not the worst, but the sort of it's almost like, if Titanic had done, iceberg drills, more people would have saved their lives.
Or put more lifeboats on.
Or put more lifeboats. Exactly. And working with the rowing team, they did man overboard drills.
Yeah.
They did various other types of drills, and so it's almost doing the what if scenarios in the context you're in. What if this happens? How would we mitigate that? What it starts to do, it creates this sort of malleability as a team or as an organization, because generally that what if scenario might not happen, but if it does, you've already thought about it. We had a strategy on that. We thought this, therefore you move swift of foot on something. But what it also does, even if it doesn't happen, you've then got a process of how you overcome things, because you say, we did all that what if scenarios, and so when something does happen, you go, okay, this has happened, how do we quickly adapt? And it makes your mindset of a team more adaptability, more open to change, more open to shifting the sort of direction of an objective or whatever based on a challenge or a setback, still with your focus on the overall vision, and that remains the same. But it just creates that mindset and a culture of change. And I think that's the important, because as you say, you said two things about the people either complain there's too much change or complain there's no change. But when people go through change, they go through the change curve and all that, and they struggle with it. And I think it's the more sense of creating that ability that change could happen, and these are sort of things that could happen, and we'll do this. Well, actually, we can feel good about that. We are okay with this. It's all going to change. We thought we were going to be here by now, but we're not. We're going to move this way, and that's okay. And I think that's that creating a culture of change is really helpful in any planning you're doing.
How much of that is perception versus reality when we're talking about adaptability to change, and the frustration with what happens? You were talking about having a plan, and the plan, I don't know who Custer, someone general said, the battle plan goes out the window as soon as the first shot's fired, which is generally, the case. How much of that also too, when we look at that, is there a misconstrue of what is reality and what is likely to happen? And I put that in the context of, we have, and you've probably seen those memes or whatever they are. It's a graphic, and it says, here was the plan, and you start here, and you've got this kind of nice smooth road to get to there. and then you go, the reality was, crap all over the place. And I wonder about that. Do we actually set ourselves, maybe with a bit of optimism bias as well, a false expectation of what the road is going to be like? We're thinking, yep, we're going to do this and it's all going to kind of go smoothly. We've got this plan and it's going to go. But the reality is, as soon as that first shot is fired, the landscape has changed. And so it is going to be a fair bit of flux in there as well. Is that, do we need to have that expectation too, which kind of goes, it makes it, I think, psychologically difficult, because, if you're going, okay, here's our plan, but you're saying this whole plan's going to go out the window as soon as we start, then you go, oh, what am I doing? So is that, but we seem to have this, again, the reality and the perception and reality seems to be disjointed when we start something. Is that what you've experienced, or is it?
Yeah, no. It's an interesting. It's almost a bit of a dilemma, really, of positivity and negativity going on here.
Yeah.
And the, even that meme in itself that you talked about there. I think, if in the context when you're halfway through a project, that meme can be really helpful, because you think, crumbs, it's all been all over the shop, and I feel a bit. That's how I feel, and I think that can be really helpful and quite releasing, and thinking, okay, I've got permission that it's not been the greatest, because that's what happens.
Yeah.
And often a lot of great founders of big organizations talk about, they set out to do this, and this happened, this didn't happen, all the usual stuff, and lots of fail fast and all this sort of stuff, and failure is part of winning, being successful, and it is in some context. But when you set out to do a plan at the start, that meme's not very helpful, because it's like, it makes you, what's the point then? It almost becomes,
this is going to be traumatic. What the hell?
Why are we going to even bother? Just live on a day-to-day basis. Why even bother planning?
Yeah.
And it's that balance, and in some ways it can be a bit personality type, where it becomes a little bit fatalistic. Oh well, it doesn't matter, I'll just do what I think. But I think for me, it comes about intention rather than just. And this is why I do talk about a lot about you're not in control of your outcomes, and that is quite releasing that way. I feel it is. It doesn't mean I don't set outcomes, but it's about your intention. And I think that, to me, is the important thing, is that usually intention is linked to the purpose or to vision. So that's the intent. That's where we're heading. That's the critical bit, because you need to be setting a course of direction you want to get to. If you're a sailor, you're a rower, you set a course, and from experience, and how, if you do theory and sort of stuff on this, I'm going to be all over the shop, because weather here, wind here, tide here, various things. But you set an intention, and I think that's the important thing, is not being fatalistic. Oh, it's all going to be all rubbish, because it's not. But set an intent, and I think the intent links to positivity as well, because you set the intent, this is where we're heading, and I put a plan as best I know at this point. And if that's a positive intent as well, then those challenges, setbacks, you can potentially turn them into opportunities, and you'll see opportunities more so than you would if you were thinking negatively. If you set an intent of, oh well, it's all going to be rubbish, it's going to be difficult, then the confirmation bias of our system, our body, will go, okay, we'll do. I'll look for those things that make it all go wrong, and you'll see negative. I think that, to me, is the better approach, really, rather than being fatalistic. Set the intent of where I'm going, where I'd like to go, and this is the best way, and this is the knowledge I know at this time. I'm going to do that. And then, resilience is all about, learning, isn't it? It's about things go wrong, setbacks, but actually, what can I learn from that for next time? That's the key thing. It's the learning piece, which I think people think resilience is all about, grit and determination, but actually, no, it's more about how you learn and navigate things. And I do a lot of work with teams to do that, and help them and empower them to, think for themselves. And that comes in with what if scenarios, and how do you work that process through?
I love that part where you're talking about the learning piece, and that comes back to that, because I was having that discussion. I might have mentioned this before, but I was having the discussion with my son's karate sensei about whether things are hard or easy. Because he was saying it's hard work, and I said, well, it depends. It's relative. And he goes, what? And I said, it's relative to your level of skill. I said, if you get someone who's a junior, never done karate before, is doing a yellow belt, grading, that's going to be probably going to be hard for them. But I said, if I asked you, you're a 7th dan black belt, I want you to do it at a yellow belt level. How hard would that be? And he goes, it'd be easy. And I said, well, it's not whether the task is hard or easy. It's relative to your level of skill, your level. And that's where it's coming back to what you were just saying about, it's the learning piece. It's and what I did, because I got, and I think it's because I'm lazy and I like to try and find things really easy ways of doing things. And I stole from Shakespeare in Hamlet in Scene 2, Act 2, where he says, nothing is good or bad, thinking makes it so. And coming back to that analogy of going, what's the path going to be like? And I also link that to, I think for me, the best advice I ever got in life was from my mentor, Greg Larson, who was the managing director of BP, and he was the chairman as well. But he said to me once, when I was freaking out about something I had to go to and wanting advice, and normally he wouldn't respond straight away because he'd make me think about it. I get that. 2 days later, I get it. 2 or 3 days later, I get a response to the question. But this time he responded straight away, and he said, Damien, I think you should back yourself that you'll make the right decision in the moment. And sort of combining those two, it's like, okay, you've got a plan. I know things are going to change. So I frame it that way. It's going to change. Things are going to happen. Whatever happens, it's not good or bad. It's an event. How impactful that event or my ability to deal with that event is linked to my level of skill is how I frame it. I know this is a long-winded way of explaining it, but and I say, well, so when an event happens, I'm immediately going, how can I use this? How's this going to help me get where I want to go? I had that similar with a client recently. And it was interesting because one of their clients was indicated they were going to do something wrong, not in accordance with a contract. And it wasn't, it was one of those things where it's, you go, well, how do I deal with this? So we got the lawyers to write the letter and say, look, don't do this. This is why you shouldn't be doing this. And they've come back, directly, not through a lawyer, just said, we're doing this. It's like, they completely ignored it and said, we're doing this, as though it never happened. So wrote another letter and my client's lawyer wrote a letter. And again, got another response. It was completely different, but we're doing this. The outcome was going to be the same. It's like, okay. And then we got to the date, which was a few days ago, and they just went and did it anyway. And it's like, well, what do we do now? It's like, well, okay, we're just gonna, we can start a legal battle, but is that really going to solve anything? We'll spend a lot of money on legal fees, and you may get some restitution in 18 months time. So it became, okay, how do we adjust to that? And became, we'll just put it under we just pushed it to the side, so just let it go, and we adapted what we needed to do, because it was just a cheaper outcome. But it could have been a really frustrating, when we're dealing with change, it could have been you could have ended up in a big legal fight, could have, which was not, distraction, but I think it came back to not just the vision that we had, but also some higher values. I think that's where we put that under, going, is this worth that fight? And it was like, which battles do you fight? And it became, in the bigger scheme of where we're going to, this is not worth that effort to be spent on that and distracting us. And therefore it became less emotional, which is dealing with change. I'm not sure from your experience, where people adapting to change have difficulty because of emotion. That's probably a rhetorical statement.
Yeah, no, I think it's emotions. Yeah, I think it's having that. The values piece is important, almost in the context of what you're doing. Does this how we operate, how we do things, but also on the bigger scheme of things, does it matter? And it doesn't mean you discard people to work on something, whatever, but actually will this make a difference if we don't do this or do this, whatever it may be?
Yeah.
And being willing to, I hate to people see negative in the sense of giving up on something or stopping something. People see that as a real negative. And I think sometimes it takes more courage to stop something sometimes than to just keep going and think it might get there just in the end. I think, and we'll keep going, even though we know.
I think it takes a really, really healthy ego. I mean, an unhealthy ego will get in the way and say, "No, we're going to do it despite that." And then I've seen people cut their nose off to spite their face, to use that metaphor. It literally made their situation worse because they said, "No, we're going to stamp our foot," and then 3 years later, they've lost a lot of money.
But and also it distracts you, those sort of things, and certainly legal stuff. It distracts a business, distracts a team. And I'm not that, if things are right, you need to pursue legal things. I'm not saying you should, but actually, it's sometimes in life, it's actually, I'm just best just to see it as a loss, and it's a short-term loss, but longer term, I want to focus on this and actually move on. Otherwise, yes, I might end up being right, but spend 12, 18 months focused on it, more money, but not just money, but my time and productivity has been focused on this. And I think sometimes I think this is where certainly business owners, when the sort of smaller businesses, need outside mentors almost to help them step back a little bit and go, oh, hold on a minute, look at the bigger picture. What really matters here? What are you trying to do? What's important to you? Can you see this just as a loss for now? And and actually to give you energy and to focus on the bigger stuff. And I think and it is the ego bit and being right and everything else. But actually, do you know what? Doesn't matter really. And as long as you can keep focused on your purpose and your vision and what you're trying to do, just see it as a loss and cut it loose, as it were. I heard of saying and almost, but that's also with plans as well. In sometimes willing to say, this is not working. For whatever reason, we've tried this. We've problem solved it. It's just not working. We're going to stop it. And I think, I sense a lot of negativity with giving up. And is it the best sort of professional poker players are the ones that know when to fold. And I think there's some real wisdom in that. Think about when it's best to fold sometimes and just think, nah, I haven't got a good hand. I'm just going to fold. Or I just don't think it's just going to work. I'm just going to fold. And actually there's some positivity in that, because that means you're adapting really. That means you're going to move on to what's next and releasing time, capacity, energy, and thoughts onto something else, because you're letting go on something and move on.
Because I wonder what it takes. Is from my own experience, I've had that where you talk about knowing to fold. A business that I started a little while ago now, but I started that, and the enthusiasm was there. I think the optimism bias was there. There's certainly some things from my perspective I didn't have that skill. I was certainly a yellow belt, not a black belt, and also too in the hiring of the manager that I had to get to do that. There was a lot of really good traits, but there's a couple of key traits that were missing. But I didn't pick up on that until after we're in the situation, because I wasn't there to be running the day-to-day sort of thing. I was guiding it, but the manager was there, and he did a really, really good job in a number of areas. But there's a couple of key areas that he didn't do. But then again, that could have come down to I didn't guide him well enough too. So maybe, I don't know. But it got to, I was looking at it, and we only got, I think, 5 months into it, and it was not, the revenue wasn't making a profit yet, and the revenue wasn't increasing, was the component I was looking at. That I was looking at those two elements, and I put 100 grand into it too, so it wasn't a small, decent chunk of change. So I'm assessing, okay, put 100 grand here. What do I do? And I wasn't personally exposed, so that I'd set that up from the beginning. I wasn't going to be personally exposed, so I managed to cover all that off. But I looked at it and went, just this revenue's not going up. We can go on and maybe it might pick up. But I was looking at going, even if it does pick up, it's still, it's going to take, I don't know, 6 months before that gets even to, maybe, unless something dramatically changes, a gradual increase, it's going to be 6 months. But there was no revenue growth at all at that point.
Right.
And so I just went, fuck it, I'm closing it. I just closed it, shut it down straight away, and kept all the IP, which I was able to use a lot of that later and repurpose things. But it was one of those things where, I mean, and I'm just wondering how other people might do with all the things that you've seen. For me, I looked at it and went, well, there's no revenue growth. There's there's no guarantee there is going to be any revenue growth, let alone a profit. So I could just keep sinking more and more money into this, or I could take it on the chin now that I've dropped $100,000, and walk away and think about how to do it again. And I'm not sure what it was that why I, what gave me the ability to choose that. And I'll never know if it would have succeeded or not anyway, because you can't know. How do, from your experience, do people deal with that, that uncertainty of not knowing which way to go?
It's a difficult one. It's and I always feel, the decision you make is the right decision. Think that really at that time, the knowledge at that point at moments, because I think the regret comes in quite easily sometimes, particularly if you shut things down or don't do something, and then 6 months later somebody else does it or a competitor does it, and then you think, oh, well, no, at the time that was where you were at. And I think it's the regret piece as well we've got to handle. But it comes at just a judgment call, I think, and it is based on your experience. It is based on the insights at the time, and I think the key thing is making sure that you feel you've done the best you can do in the knowledge and the people you've got. That's the key thing. You've explored everything you can do in that scenario, and this is where I think is always helpful, certainly for sort of smaller companies I deal with, is to have outside advisors in as well, just to help you and challenge you and say,
definitely,
do you know what? I think it's time to, consider something about this opportunity. It doesn't sit. I've been on this board for 6 months and we get the same sort of feedback of nothing's happening. Are they doing it wrong, or it's not the right time? Should we shelve it, pause it, whatever it is? And I think people need that outside perspective. And I always, whether you're a very small business, I think everybody needs some outside perspectives who just sees it differently and sees it in perhaps a fresh way. And I always advise certainly business owners to have a mentor who you can just bounce off, or be part of a mastermind. There's various things where you can just elicit other people's experience and insight. Doesn't mean you take their advice or everything they say. It's just somewhere where you can reflect and mull over things and bounce things around a little bit, and just sort of get some rigor about making some decisions. But I think once you make a decision, you believe you're making that on what you right now, and that's it. And don't live with the regrets of what happens. You can always resurrect things, always change things, always do things differently next time. And also, just because I think people then see it as a lost opportunity or loss of energy, or we've just done all this energy into this. And well, actually, why don't you do a debrief when you fold something and go, what did we learn in the last 12, 18, whatever long you had a business, and get some understanding. You talked about, that learned process. I think that's really helpful, because I think it's where a lot of businesses, not just on closing things down, but moving on from things, is understand, what do we learn? What can we do that next time in our businesses? What else can we use this insight? And so I think it's important to do a debrief, and that's almost creates closure of that folding of a company or a project or whatever it may be, is important as well.
It's an interesting point. I'd forgotten about that. I'd asked a couple of people, including my dad, who knew nothing about that industry, but I just kept it high level and explained about what was going on, and got that. So your point about having that external advice, yeah, I'd forgotten that I'd done that. I'd actually, talked to a number of people about this situation and gone, okay, we need to, this is what I'm going through, and this is what I'm thinking. Well, and yes, and even to when I talked to my dad, who wasn't he didn't know nothing about the business or what would or wouldn't make it succeed or fail, but it was just having that bouncing board made a big difference. And the other point, exactly what you're talking about, I didn't see it as a negative that it shut down. I learnt. I actually said there was a couple of key things I think that caused the problem that were me, that I didn't know at that time. So which I was able to then integrate in the future and made other things much more successful because I learned from that. So that debrief is really, really important as well. So that those two components. I suppose when you were talking about adapting to change, I mean, if you're adapting to change, you probably want as much information as you can to address the situation. Is where we're getting to with that.
Yeah, and adapting to change means you're going to stop some things because
as
I
obvious
mean
as that sounds, yeah, when you say it that way.
I mean, it's if you're creating a culture of adapting to change, then you're going to stop doing stuff because they're not working. And you know what I mean? You're not banging it. And I think do that on a small level, you become more comfortable with that process, more comfortable with that concept of stopping things. And I think anything in life, you know, rather than just folding a whole company, which is quite a big thing, and it feels very emotional and very I've invested in everything, not just financially, it's the emotional thing, and that's the big thing. But actually, if you're doing this on a weekly, daily, whatever, monthly basis of stopping things because they're just not working, you know, actually you become more comfortable with that concept of okay, I'm happy to sort of lay this down, move on. It's tough. It's really hard because I think it's more than the financial piece. It's the emotional engagement, emotional energy that's gone into something, and the connection with that, what it means. And you might go, well, this is part of my purpose. It's part of the biggest plan. It's all linked to that and everything else. But some things are just, it's just not the time. It's just not for you. Which is fine. It's okay. It might be another, as you say, you've learned tons in that process, and actually you're using it in other ways. So actually nothing's ever lost, really, is it? And I think, and it sounds really
cliche.
Sort of, you know, cliche.
Can you get any more cliche than that?
I know, but
it's true.
The reframe on that is really true. Actually, it makes you think. Actually, you think more positively. You see things as opportunities. You see things as not as failure. It's feedback. Or I know, you know, cliche again, but it's that mindset will help you and be good for you in terms of moving forward. Definitely.
And that's right, because I linked that back to again that black belt experience with my son's sensei, talking about it's, you know, is it hard or easy? There's a friend of mine, he's a venture capitalist, screens. But anyway, I mean, when he talks about business and he goes, you know, I can pretty much tell straight away whether it's going to succeed or fail. But that's an experience thing. He's dealt with so many that he can immediately go, oh, okay, that, you know, there's a logical within his area of expertise, of course.
Yeah,
he just almost knows intuitively whether it's going to succeed or fail. But that comes from experience, and you know, it's like when we're learning to walk. You know, how many times we fall over? You know, the study shows 8,000 times. Again, people, I don't know who studies this stuff, but people do. I don't get it, but anyway, I'm kind of glad they did because they've now got that reference in that story. But it's, you know, from that perspective, when we're looking at this adaptability, it's going, well, you know, how much experience do we actually have too? I mean, we need to consider that in the picture. Going, you know, are we being realistic with ourselves in where we're going when we're setting, you know, exploring the plan? Going back to that original thing. I mean, Warren Buffett talks about that all the time, about operating in your circle of competence, as he calls it. I know from my perspective, I mean, that business I mentioned before, that was well outside of my circle of competence at the time, which I put that down to, that was a big reason why, probably if it was in my circle of competence, circle of confidence is probably a different thing. You know, maybe I wouldn't have started it. I don't know. Yeah. So, but I'm just looking at that from that perspective of how we adapt to change. But part of it, I think, seems to be what we're talking about. There's a lot to do with managing your own ego and being realistic, having that external people to bounce across and being open and listening to what they've got to say.
Yeah, I think we've got to be careful we don't get into the sort of fatalistic mindset where it's all going to be all bad and oh well, I'll try a plan, but it might not succeed because that's not
That doesn't
helpful
work. That's not
neither.
going to, yeah, you don't get motivated by
It,
that.
it's having this intent with a slight. I think it was Simon Sinek said his view on the sort of future is he's optimistic, but he's rooted in reality, and I quite like that sense of he's got an optimism about life and what he's trying to do, but he's also rooted in reality of what is happening right now. And I think that it's a nice tension to have, and I think this is where in life nothing is binary. There's always tensions. And I think and conflicts, and that sometimes can be in our emotions. And I think so it's having that intent of optimism of setting out to sail across an ocean with the right intent. I'm going to succeed, and I've got all the skills I need, all that sort of stuff. But I'm also rooted in the reality of today. There's a storm coming. I need to tack somewhere else, navigate somewhere else. Something that
I've
mindset
counted
as well.
the amount of passengers, and I've got enough lifeboats for each of them.
Exactly. Yes, and it's having, but it's rooted in reality, and I quite like that, and it just gives nice, healthy tension and making sure we're not being completely fatalistic. Oh, it's all going to go wrong, or pie in the sky and won't give up on anything because. We're just going to succeed. It will happen. That's what they do. These influencers on TikTok, they did this and they succeeded, and I will do the same. And I just got to keep going and grit and determination. Well, actually, you just perhaps need to fold. That's okay.
Well, there's that element too, but I'm going to come back to that reality and perception. And because I was referenced Bill Gates there when he started Microsoft, he set a requirement that they keep enough cash in the bank to pay people for a year. So they had a substantial, from the very beginning, they made sure that they kept that, and that gave them security, which I understand that it came in handy from time to time, which kept them afloat, if I remember the stories correctly. But that key component of having that realistic, as you were saying, that realistic, there's a reality there, and we need to be prepared for that as well. So making sure that you do have enough of a buffer to adapt to the change when it happens.
Yeah, totally. And that's not just financially, that can be resource, capacity, and everything else. I think that's important because change does require energy, in terms of people and brain power and everything else.
Exactly. Anyway, I know we've both got to move on. It's been a great discussion. There's a lot there. I always enjoyed chatting with you. I learnt a lot from that, and I've got a few more acronyms that I can draw upon.
I love it. I always, I just love our thinking, and it always makes me sort of feel challenged about things, and I always go away thinking, I need to give a bit more thought to that actually, because that's why life's not binary, is it? And that's why it's good to talk to other people, get other people's experience, just by what we're sharing now. You're informing me, shaping me, and vice versa. And
correct, yeah.
Not and changing opinion, or not opinions, but more about giving different perspectives that might create a learning opportunity for me or for you. And I think that's the value of these conversations for me.
Yeah, exactly. From my perspective, I learned so much. There's different perspectives, and that comes from listening. Listeners, if you're listening, make sure you listen to people because it's really important. Because same token, I learned so much from what you say. It gives a different perspective, and go, that makes sense in this, and it relates to that. So, Julian, thank you very much for the chat. Look forward to catching up again soon. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Good to see you.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.